So the question is it a good idea to use limiters within your mix if you're looking for pro level results? And if you do decide to use a limiter in your mix, where should you be using them within your mix? Welcome to Viewer Questions Answered, episode 44. Who we are limiters best for bringing a mix forward? Well, what do you mean by forward? Louder? Or do you mean more present? More present. Let me know who we are, what you mean. That can mean multiple things. As far as making them louder, yes and no. I mean, you still have to, limiters are great, don't get me wrong, but you can easily overdo them and they can destroy your transients on your drums. That's why it's all about subtlety and stacking your processes throughout your mix. That's my take on that. More present, well, no. Well, okay, so the biggest areas for me, actually I have a mix pulled up here that I can show you in real time here. So for example, the limiter here is really working heavily on my bass guitar. And that's really what's doing the heavy lifting as far as limiting in this mix. I'm not doing hardly any limiting on the master bus at all, and no limiting on the drums as well. These days I would be using clippers and maybe some more saturation, but I was a little more crude with this back in the day. But this is from way back in 2011 where I really got my stuff together and started getting things right at the source and simplifying my approach. The places where I use limiters most would be bass guitars to keep the low end in check. Vocals are another one to keep the, lop off any excess transient on vocals. For example, let's see if we got some vocalages here. My man Steve singing, and I've got a limiter on his voice to keep him in check. And that's really it. So it's not a one quick fix. A lot of people will obsess about limiters on their master bus trying to get their mixes loud, even though that's not really as necessary in today's day and age. And that's not the way to do it, in my opinion. But great question. Okay, who we are says, I like to know what you mean when you say in check in terms of your use of limiters. Well, what I mean is they're not overly dynamic. So for example, let's go to this vocal track here. Okay, perfect example. Now I have a bunch of automation on the track because I like to use a lot of automation specifically on vocals, but let me just boost it so you can hear what I mean. Because the limiter is making it sound louder also. Take a close listen to this vocal track right now. There's no limiting, okay? So it's not in check. See how it just sounds more not polished? It sounds great, but he's singing consistently. That's any vocalist, right? Because remember, vocalists have to compete with friggin' heavy guitars, slamming drums. We need to make them as uniform and as consistent as the guitars are. And the human voice just naturally is not like that. So in the mix, that's our job as mixing engineers. So what I do is use a limiter, and that's actually compressed vocals also. So if I were to take compression off, forget about it. But the limiter just adds that nice little bit of extra control to keep the vocal nice and consistent. And then I still apply automation on top of that to bring out specific words and phrases that I feel are important for the listener to take notice of. Because what a lot of home studio people will do, myself included, is we'll just slap plugins on it and hope that it works. But automation is how you breathe life into your mix. So let's take a listen. So right there, that just made him extra consistent. This is nothing unique to me. If you watch most modern mixers, they're doing some form of limiting and compressing, sometimes more than one compressor on the vocals. And that's what I mean by keeping them in check. Excellent question. Okay, Alex asks, Multiband Compression on the master bus, rock and metal. What's your philosophy? What should I be striving for? Control low end, pump, clean low ends. Okay, my approach, man, is that I don't even know if I have any on this particular mix. This is an older mix. I might not have any. Come on, Ozone, you can do it. Yeah, I don't have any, but let me show you what I would do if this were done today to show you my exact approach. There's a setting in C4 that's called Basic Multi. Reset the gain. For me, that's way too much what you're seeing. Way too much. So I'm going for like a couple dB at most. And for the most part, I don't want to see too much action. In other words, like I don't want to see too much going on in the low end or the top end and mid-range. I want it to be relatively uniform. So I know that my mix is not jacked in any one particular frequency band. So I'm looking for like 2 to 3 dB max within each of the frequency bands. Something like this. this mix is very balanced, so you're not gonna see crazy stuff happening. If I were like a mastering engineer and someone sent me like a home recorded track by maybe someone that doesn't know how to balance their low end or something like that, then maybe I'd have to do more work with the multiband. But if I'm mastering my own stuff, I just prefer to get the mix right. That's my philosophy. I know it's a little oversimplified, but it's the truth. So great question. Luke Traina, it's a cool name, Traina. Luke Traina. Hey Bobby, in a hard rock metal context, best way to widen low end without losing clarity and or low end to guitars without making them too subby. I don't worry about widening low end, dude. Well, first of all, actually, a lot of guys or girls will actually do the opposite and they'll monoize their low end to keep their mix nice and clean. Most of your low end instruments that are below 100 hertz are going to be in the middle anyway. Your kick drum and bass, and if you have any 808s or sub drops, are going to be in the middle. Guitars are not a low frequency instrument in that regard. There's not a whole lot of sub going on guitars. Even if, I know I get this question all the time, even if you're using 8 strings tuned down to X, right? Or drop E or whatever, you're still not having a lot going on below 90 hertz. There's not like a bunch of punch in the 50 hertz range on guitar. So by default, if you're filtering your mix properly, you don't have to worry about that too much. And you don't want a wide low end because it's actually hard because low end is generally omnidirectional. That's why if you have a home theater set up, you can have one sub and kind of place it anywhere in the room and it doesn't really matter, if that makes sense. So I would not worry about widening low end. That is a non-issue. If you want to know the truth. Great question. Ben, banking off of the limiting question from who we are, would you limit the same way for a guitar or something on an instrumental track? Dude, my guitar tracks look like this. So this is a Marshall that was recorded with an SM57. Literally, my entire guitar chain is this. This is my EQ. I'm just rolling. And this is recorded with the cheapest gear you'll ever find. I'll tell you the exact rig. I was recording through a PreSonus Digimax LT preamp, 8 added into a Digio 2, which was a Firewire cheapo interface, like consumer grade Firewire interface back in the day, into my 2006 MacBook Pro with only 2 gigs of RAM. That was my whole rig for recording this album. And here's my EQ. So you do not need fancy gear to get decent tones. So rolling off all frequencies below 70 hertz, all frequencies above 12K. That's what's going on the individual guitars. And then the only compression I have going on is a little bit of C4 just to control the palm beats. So it's just controlling the chugga-da-chugga-das, and that's it. I rarely will compress guitars. Unless I want a little bit of character and I want them to pump and sound fun for some reason, then I'll smack them with compression. But we have to remember, guitar is already compressed, right? They're distorted. Distortion is sort of a form of compression. So you don't have to worry about limiting guitars. I know there are producers out there, really good ones, that do that, right? And from what I found is they're mainly doing that to control it's the same thing I'm doing. They're just doing it in a broadband sense. My ear likes to hear the more spongy guitar tone. I don't like guitars that sound super duper like smashed like that. That's just my own personal opinion. So that's my take. Now, if you're looking to improve the sound of your mixes, it's critical to have a firm grasp on solid EQ and compression techniques. And this is why I'm offering you direct access right now for absolutely free to my crisp and clear heavy mix formula. The heavy mix formula is comprised of 3 main components: an EQ and compression cheat sheet that contains all of my starting points when it's time to mix a heavy production. Within the cheat sheet, there are clickable links to private mixing tutorials for all of the main instruments within a heavy production. And finally, there's a clickable link below each of the individual tutorials so you could download the exact same multi-tracks that I'm using so you can mix along with me. Again, the crisp and clear heavy mix formula is absolutely free, and there's a link below that you can click and you can have direct access right now. And until next time, happy mixing.